So, a warm welcome to all attendees who are joining us now, and especially warm welcome to Jenny, Jane, and Damien. I think we've got a really interesting webinar ahead of us. But before we start for sure, I'm Tessa Guttridge. I'm chair of the Young Dementia Network, and I wanted just to remind attendees that you're not on video and audio. But we very much would like you to use the chat function as much as you wish, but also to add questions to the Q&A box as they occur to you through the webinar. What we're going to do to start off with is to play for you a pre-recorded conversation with Wayne and Michael, and we'll do that now. And Damien is having that conversation with them.
We're recording, right? I'd just like to ask you guys, really, because obviously the theme is about living alone with dementia. What helps you in your situation? What helps you as people living on your own? Wayne, can I come to you?
Absolutely. As someone living alone, the biggest thing that have helped me is living alone. I say that not to upset or be contentious or to try and indicate alone is better, but I do not feel like I have as many issues in my daily existence as I hear about in my peers. I honestly believe, and what I've seen in my peers over the last decade, is that those alone have to do, plan, get, fix, manage, etc., all the things themselves. And that has, on appearance, not statistically or scientifically proven, seem to help those alone live longer, be more productive, be better self-aware, and travel the dementia downward curve slower. If we do not do it ourselves, it doesn't get done. Planning and problem-solving skills remain practiced and honed, which helps us in all aspects of life and maintaining independence. It also more quickly and clearly identifies where you need help and to what degree, so you can build a necessary safety network around you. I know that due to dementia being such a nasty and powerful adversary, that anything or anything could change at any time. But for now, I'm happy, content, positive, productive, and the driver of my own life.
Wayne, thank you so much. Michael, same question to you, really. What helps you?
Well, it's basically the same as Wayne. I find now a lot of carers, I go to a lot of support groups. A lot of carers don't like my attitude, because I actually find they wrap the person up in cotton wool. So if somebody wants to do something, they'll say to them, "Oh no, you can't do that. I'll do it for you." And to me, that's the worst thing, because there's that thing, use it or lose it. But I find if you live on your own, there's nobody to do it for you, so you've got to do it yourself. You've got to make arrangements, you've got to tweak things, you've got to find other ways to adapt. And to me, I actually think I know for me, living on my own is actually better for me, because I adapt things, I change things. I won't let people tell me I can't do this or I can do this. My attitude is I will try it first. If I can do it, I'm going to do it. If I can't do it, I'll admit I can't do it. But I won't let somebody come up and say to me, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You've got dementia."
And what does it look like, I suppose? That's my question. Have you built a network of support, and what does it look like?
Yeah, if you don't mind me jumping in, Michael. Yeah, I think that, yes, we do, but I'm not sure that I think of it in those terms. I don't kind of think, "Oh my God, I need help or support in this." I just automatically, I suppose, as I would have done in the previous life, the non-dementia life, that other life. You know, when you come up against a problem, you use whatever is at your disposal as a resource, including people, unfortunately, to solve that problem.
Yeah, it might just be, all right, then let me rephrase the question. I'll come to you, Michael. Who's out there that you can who can help you, or who's a friend, or Wayne said, sometimes I even speak to other people. Are there other people in your life that sort of help you out every now and then?
There actually is. I can give you. There are actually support groups. One's for young onset dementia, called Pathways Young Onset Dementia. It's more a friendly group, so it's more we go and have a laugh and a banter, and then once a year we go on a holiday. But the thing is, we go and say I was having an issue with something, there'll be somebody there which went through it. There might be a carer who has worked with maybe their husband or their wife, and they've come across it. And then I know it's a terrible thing to say, but I call it picking their brains, which is a terrible thing to say with somebody with dementia and picking your brain, because then I'd find out, well, how did they cope? And then I'll take it home. I'll maybe tweak it and make changes to see if it works for me. And they actually do the same. They'll get something from me and they'll take it and tweak it. So to me, we actually work off each other.
From the point of view of Dementia Diaries, and I think that peer group is a great support, because you're learning what issues could be coming from those that have already been facing them, and that gives the chance to prepare in advance in a way, or even change your life or environment to stop it becoming an issue.
What would be the message based on your experience? What's the message you'd like to give to someone recently diagnosed who's living on their own? Wayne, start away.
As much as is possible, hang on to yourself. As I say, I thrill to the fact, and I do everything I possibly can to be the, as a quote, the driver of my life. I don't want to be a passenger. It's my life. I'm going to drive. If I crash, I crash, there you go. But I want to be the driver of my life. And I actually think that taking that responsibility, the more you do yourself, the more you're able to do yourself.
If somebody's just recently been diagnosed, my advice is don't give up. Start looking around to see what peer support groups is out there. Start talking to people with dementia, because they're the one person that you're going to learn it all from. And the thing is, when you see people surviving, people doing well, then you get hope. You start thinking, oh, this isn't the end. If they can do it, I can do it.
But service providers, but also the general public, what would be your sort of key message you'd like to share? I'll come to Wayne again, as usual.
Listen, please, listen. Don't assume. Listen.
Michael, what's your message to the sort of the wider world?
The thing is, I've actually come across, there's a lot of stigma and people making assumptions. Once they see that word dementia, they've automatically made their mind up what way you're supposed to be, and it isn't the case.
A lot of the time, living alone doesn't have to automatically be a negative or a problem.
But that's the problem. Once something, say you lose somebody with authority, people then assume you're vulnerable and they try to take advantage of you.
I just want to know, really, how was it for you just taking part in that research program over the last sort of couple of years?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it. Like I say, to get the chance to try to change the world, or change the attitude of the world for all people with dementia, is obviously wonderful. But it's even better, a bit mercenary, but it's even better when we're doing it for people that are in the same boat as I'm paddling along in, this living alone thing.
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. That's very helpful.
I
Michael, how was it for you?
I actually enjoyed it. I always maintain we can't change the whole thing overnight, but we can make small changes. And it's the small changes what make the difference. So we mightn't change the whole system, but we'll change wee pieces at a time.
Mm-hmm. Make your own little ripples in the water.
Yeah, yeah. But it is interesting when you turn up and you meet other people that living on their own, and we've all got the same things. We all want the same changes.
So you've got a very clear idea of what sort of service providers should do, really, yeah, which has been
Yeah, yeah.
and hopefully that's come out certainly in the research and the resources that have been produced. So, all I can say is a big thank you to both of you.
So we're over to Damien now, who's going to tell us a bit more about the research and the projects and involving people with dementia who don't have informal carers. But I just wanted to say that was a cracking start. That was really positive, and that whole sense of the determination to, drive your own life, irrespective of symptoms, etc., and the stigma that people face, irrespective of that too. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Damien, for doing that for us. Over to you.
Thanks, Tessa. Yeah, apologies for the very poor amateur editing, but the key points came out. That was a good 45-minute conversation I had with Wayne and Michael. So I've taken out the swearing and the rude bits to sanitize it for you all. But yeah, those key messages, and they did mirror a lot of the stuff that I know that, and Jenny will talk more about that shortly, around sort of, that presumed or assumed ultra vulnerability of someone living on their own. But I want to talk about, the process really of involving people with dementia and people living on their own with dementia in the research process. It was fascinating. It was great to hear that they loved it and enjoyed it. We had a team of 4, Michael and Wayne, as you've seen, and Monica and Faz as well, another 2 ladies. And I suppose we went on the principle that if it's dementia friendly, if you want to call it that, if it's accessible for people with dementia, it's going to be accessible for everybody. So we just really kept things as simple and clear as possible. We had a lot of meetings face to face, on Zoom. There's some journeys involved and accommodation arranging, all that sort of stuff. And it's about just breaking everything down step by step. And certainly for the Zoom sessions, we'd pre-warn people, we'd send documentation out in advance saying, how about this? This is something to think about. So people, when they came on a meeting, weren't caught short with a question they hadn't been asked before. It was something they'd thought about. They may have made some notes in advance, or we may have had a sort of just an informal discussion in advance as well, sort of a preparatory Zoom, if you want. I'd like to talk specifically about Monica, who was on our program, because Monica was living on her own. She absolutely fit the bill of somebody living on their own without informal support. She magically appeared one day in one of our groups up here in York, and she described herself as an inveterate picker-upper of leaflets. And she, so she would call them. So there was this element of sort of, as I think Wayne says, if nobody does it we've got to do it ourselves. And she was very much one to sort of follow up and pick up and make calls and make those connections. So again, that sort of presumed, or you're completely vulnerable message, it tends to imply complete incompetence, which is obviously not the case. And also Monica didn't have internet, anything like that. So she would come to my house and we'd share the screen and we'd prepare and we'd make some notes before. So she was very much able to participate. Her memory was extremely short term, but in the moment, which is always the best moment, she was just brilliant, apposite in her comments, and it really, really contributed to the whole process. We went for a visit to Sheffield University for one of the workshops. So I accompanied Monica on the train. And there was a lot of academic language floating about. There was also, it was a mixed meeting. So there were some people joining on the big screen. So there were some sort of inanimate voices, which could have been off-putting. And I sat next to Monica, whose hearing wasn't the best either. And I was just writing down in sort of large note form on my pad what people were saying, and Monica was reading it. So she was able to keep abreast of everything. Just simple. I was just writing some simple phrases. This is what we're talking about now. Somebody's mentioned this, and she was able to comment on all those things. So it's really going to, there's always ways you can make things a bit more accessible. There's always ways to support people. And I think because Monica was very much on the edge of independence, and in fact, during the making of the sort of the report and the final element of the research, she moved into long-term care, but her contribution was massive, and it was just the fact that we listened. As Wayne said, we listened, and we gave her the chance to sort of express herself so that we could then listen. And when we were on the sort of I love the process that and Jenny and colleagues devised around sort of the data analysis, and we all met at Sheffield University again, and through a series of sort of small, simple questions and lots of post-it notes all over the place, Jenny, devised a system where we could just sort of contribute, and Monica again, and everyone else, and Wayne and Faz and Michael all contributed really, really powerfully, carrying out what often people assume can be quite a sort of a complex thing around data analysis. But yeah, little pithy and apposite comments from Monica, made it through, and they were really, really caught and captured. So that was fantastic. So the face-to-face stuff was really important, and practically, logistically, so supporting itineraries, producing information in different formats. For people, I know Faz wanted things sent through in large print and by post, which she got. So that was really, really helpful. Again, just meeting everybody's needs, so giving everyone that level playing field, if you want. And even if people couldn't remember what they'd done, it didn't matter. We captured stuff, we made notes, and we shared reports of what happened and thanked people. And we thank people practically, obviously, with payment for their expertise, and knowing how slowly universities' sort of finance departments often grind into action. I think what we did, we made arrangements with us at Innovations in Dementia, that we would reimburse and then invoice the university afterwards, and so that Michael, Wayne, Monica, and Faz all got sort of any taxi fares, hotel bills, all that sort of thing sorted and reimbursed almost immediately, really. So that was a really important thing, because people don't want that stress, and it's going to put people off joining in. So we tried to make it as practical and as accessible, and Wayne and Michael said they enjoyed it, so that certainly didn't take from it. So yeah, just general principles: listen to people, don't assume vulnerability. People with dementia can. I mean, that's our message in terms of the work of Innovations in Dementia. We work alongside people with dementia, always have done, and we take the lead from what people say or what people don't say, or how people act or don't act. And that's no different in the way we sort of help sort of facilitate the involvement of people with dementia on the program, on the research. I think that's me come to an end, really, of winging it. So I don't know what's next, whether there's questions or whether we're moving on to Jenny.
We're going to encourage people to put questions in the Q&A box, but for now I think we'll move on to Jenny, and thank you very much for doing that, Damien. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Damien, and also for that, for facilitating the video as well. I'm just going to share some slides with you, which you should be able to see. Yep, give me a shout if you can't. Okay, so my name is Jenni Brooks. I'm Associate Professor of Social Policy at Sheffield Hallam University. Should get Sheffield Hallam in there, not Sheffield University, Damien. We'll get into trouble. I'm going to talk briefly about the findings of the research project that you've heard Wayne and Michael and Damien talking about, which was about living alone with dementia, and specifically about managing without informal support to contact and navigate services. I just want to briefly mention the photographs that we use in this presentation are from the Centre for Ageing Better's Age Positive Image Library. So if you ever do use images in presentations, that's an excellent place to get them from. So this project has been a collaboration between the organisations that you see on the slide there as well, and we've also had a whole host of advisors, two you've just met, and you've heard Damien talking about the others, and then people from a variety of other organisations, including Dementia UK, a regional branch of the Alzheimer's Society, and Skills for Care as well. So, moving my slides on, just a quick disclaimer that this research was funded by the National Institute for Health and Care Research, but these are the views of the research team, not the funder overall. Not that we're saying anything controversial, but have to put that in. So our research, as I said, focused on people with dementia who live alone and who are managing without informal support to contact and navigate services. And for brevity, we do say living on their own without an informal carer, but this is specifically what the project focused on. So they might have somebody to help them do the shopping or to put the bins out, but they don't have someone helping them to navigate arranging hospital appointments or sorting out support from social care. So it's quite a specific thing. So we also know that lots of research excludes people who don't have a carer. Researchers often rely on carers to facilitate involvement in research. So one of the things we wanted to do, as Damien's just been talking about, was facilitate this group of people who don't have a carer being involved in having a say. It's really important that we heard from people themselves as well. So I'll tell you briefly what we did. We had an audit of what services were available for this group in 2 regions in England. I always get hiccups whenever I present. We did some interviews with people with dementia themselves. We did case studies in 4 local authority areas, and we did workshops with various stakeholders to develop resources. So we had workshops involving people with dementia and commissioners and practitioners. And I've seen a couple of names pop up on the participants list that I recognise from those workshops. So if you were involved in there, hello. Okay, so I'll talk about the findings from the audit first. So we spoke to commissioners in 2 regions in England about the services that they commissioned, and we had a much better response rate in one region than another region for various reasons. I think one region was going through quite a lot of staff turnover and those sorts of things. But of the people who responded, most of them had done some prevalence analysis of how many people with dementia were in the local area. So they knew how many people with dementia lived in their local area, but none of them knew how many people lived alone or how many people lived without carers. There's some very recent national research came out in the last month or 2 from the University of Exeter that found that around 40% of people with dementia who don't live in a care home live on their own. So it's a quite big number actually, but what we still don't know is how many people live on their own and don't have somebody supporting them with that kind of navigating of services. Okay. So only 2 local authorities had services or pathways for this group, so it's a really small number, and that was specifically for people living on their own. Okay, and that included things like supported handover to other services, allowing people to self-refer back into the living alone pathway whenever they wanted to, more frequent reviews for people who were living on their own. Sounds like common sense stuff, but it wasn't being done in a lot of places. Some services that were aimed at people with dementia excluded people who didn't have a carer, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So there's gaps for this group in the areas that we looked at. As far as we can tell, certainly in the regions that we looked at, nobody was looking at that population level data about people who live without a carer and without on their own. And most of the local authorities didn't have a specific service or pathway. That's not to say that individual services weren't keeping an eye out for individual people, but there wasn't a kind of commissioned overall service. So we also talked to people with dementia themselves who lived on their own without informal support, and I'll tell you about that now, along with the implications for service providers that came out of our case studies and our stakeholder workshops, which are set out in our guides for professionals, which I'll give you a link to later. So I should say that our project didn't specifically focus on young onset dementia, although quite a few of the people who were living on their own without informal care were relatively at the younger end. We had a real mix of people in terms of living situation, whether people were in an extra care facility or on their own, in their own house, rented or owned. The family situation that people were in, people might have had no children or estranged from the children, or the children had other responsibilities or health issues, which meant that they weren't involved. Real mix of diagnosis, and also a real mix in terms of what social care support people were received. So some of the findings that I'm going to talk to you about do feel quite specific, feel quite general, sorry, but the implications for this group are quite specific. So not everyone felt ready for dementia-specific services or information when they were diagnosed, understandably. And while a couple of people had filed away information, several had lost it, as we all might do, and some had received no post-diagnostic support whatsoever. Many people did attend some sort of group or service that was dementia-specific, but there was a strong feeling that not just any group would do, especially for people who were younger. But of course, people wanted to find something that felt right for them. So the key message here is that people living on their own without an informal carer didn't have someone to help them find and navigate those groups that the right support that they needed. And so in terms of implications for providers, regular contact was really important. So even if somebody didn't need support at that stage, giving a phone call 2 or 3 months later was really helpful, rather than expecting people to find their own way back in to that service, because things do change, as you know. A variety of services was really important to make sure that lots of people's different needs were being met. And also something else that's really simple, ongoing and widespread communication to make sure that services are known about, because people aren't going to be going into a memory clinic all the time to pick up that leaflet there. People were telling us that they heard about services in fairly random places like hairdressers and those sorts of things. So I think really widespread communication about things that are available is good. So even when people knew about services and wanted to attend or be involved, they weren't always able to, partly because travel could be really more tricky without an informal carer to facilitate that. We were told about a few cases where people had been unable to access a group specifically because they didn't have a carer. So this came up in the audit, and it also came up in the interviews as well. So this might have been a more general group. So for example, one person had been a keen hill walker, and when they were diagnosed with dementia, they were unable to find a specific group that would let them carry on attending without a carer. In other cases, these were dementia-specific groups, including memory cafes. And when we spoke to a couple of those memory cafes later, they said, well, we have this no people without a carer rule, because we don't provide personal care. But those two things aren't the same, and plenty of people without a carer don't need personal care. So I think that's something that sometimes can be changed in terms of communication. People were saying, oh, well, obviously we make exceptions if people get in touch, but if somebody's living on their own without a carer and they see a leaflet or a website that says you need to attend with a carer, they're not necessarily going to ring up and say, do you mind if I don't? So in terms of implications for providers, practical issues can create real inequalities for this group that don't have a carer, and a requirement for carer support can exclude this group even when it wasn't what was intended. Okay. Pretty much everybody talked about the importance of emotional support. Many people had lots of positive things to say about living on their own, but people talked about not having someone immediately to hand to notice when they weren't feeling quite right, or to reassure them when they were having a bad day. And it meant that worrying about a small thing could quite quickly turn into worrying about a bigger thing. People talked about the ways that they tried to alleviate that kind of day-to-day worry. And without somebody in the house or without immediate family, this would often involve talking to friends. So other people with dementia were often trusted to understand what someone was going through, and they could be a valuable source of information about what other help was available. So the implications here are that actually emotional support is really important, but it's often not commissioned by services. But services can be vital in supporting relationships between people. So this is linked to the last point. People had different sizes of networks around them. In some cases, just maybe one service provider and an uninvolved neighbour who might notice if the bins hadn't gone out one week. It wasn't always easy for people to build networks, like it isn't for many of everybody. We know from other research that people's existing networks often shrink when they get dementia. And people talked about the different ways that they had built up a network around them, whether that was long-standing friends that they kept in touch with, or friends through groups that weren't dementia specific, such as faith groups or exercise classes. In some cases, providers had facilitated the development of relationships, but often it had been the person with dementia themselves. So in terms of implications, not everyone is able to be proactive in building their own network, but providers can facilitate relationship building. For example, suggesting that people swap phone numbers if they seem to be getting on, so they can have a conversation outside of that group setting if that's appropriate. So the final point is that often networks can be quite fragile. And while that's bad for everyone, it can have specific implications for this group of people who don't have somebody supporting them to navigate those services. So support can stop for lots of different reasons. Sometimes groups are run by voluntary organisations and their funding stops, or an activity is put on by a single person who becomes ill, for example. We found that often when people had quite a lot of involvement with groups or with other people, those groups and other people didn't necessarily know about each other. So in terms of implications, I think it's really important to have a contingency plan if a service is going to end. If someone's been at a group a long time, chances are they might need more support finding a new group than they did finding that one if they don't have somebody around them. So out of all of this, we developed a set of resources, all available on our website. The link is at the bottom there, and we'll circulate it with the slides later. We've got short guides for people with dementia and for the general public, longer guides for practitioners and commissioners, which are available as downloadable PDFs. I've got a few of the general public ones and the guides for people with dementia that are paper copies that I can post out if anybody would find that useful. We've compiled all our resources into kind of a training module, if you like, that you can work through one section at a time. That's on the website too. We've got 6 short videos that you can show at the start of meetings as a discussion point. And we've got a list of important questions that people with dementia can ask of services, or that services can ask of themselves. And I just want to briefly show you those questions because I'd like to, I know a lot of you are providers or working for organisations that support people with dementia, and I just want to throw this out there as a challenge to you to ask these questions in your organisation. If somebody came to you and asked them, would you know how to answer them? So these are questions we initially devised to with our group of people with dementia, our advisors and a wider group, around people asking their service providers, and then we opened it up as a challenge to service providers themselves. Where can I get information about living alone? What peer support is available? Who can I contact if I need a bit of help or if things change? Can you help me build a network? What technology might be available, and what support can you provide with that technology? I'll whiz on, but these are all available on that website. How will you notice if something is going wrong? How will you check in with me, make sure I'm not just left on my own? Who can I trust to know that I live on my own? That's a really important point. Not everybody wants that known by everybody. How can you help me to plan ahead, make sure my choices are respected? How can you make sure that I attend appointments or services on my own? And how can I get involved in volunteering and making changes in my community? Because lots of people in this situation do want to contribute. So in terms of next steps, just about to start collaborating on another project that starts in June around dementia support workers in GP surgeries for people with dementia who live alone and who don't have a carer. A previous project found that dementia support workers are really important, but that they were mostly used by carers. And so this project is looking at how do we specifically support people who don't have a carer, or how do we skill up those, or how do we support those workers to support people who have a carer, but perhaps the carer isn't always as involved, or perhaps the carer needs to be less involved for their own sake. So if you'd like more information about that, please do get in touch. There's the website address, and please do let us know if you use any of our resources. It's really keen to understand whether they're useful. Hopefully they are being developed with lots of other people, but how are you using them and what are you using them for? So I'm going to stop sharing there, and we're going to hand over to Jane, I think.
Good afternoon. My name's Jane King. I'm a frontline social worker in a community social care team in North Yorkshire, and it's really good to be here today. I qualified in 1992, done lots of different jobs in statutory and voluntary organisations, and for the last 20 years I've worked with people who have dementia. In 2023, I had a one-year secondment to look at social care research, and that brought me into contact with Jenni and the Living Alone with Dementia project. I was asked to provide feedback from my experience as social work. In social work, we call this our practice wisdom. It comes from reflecting on what we have learnt working in the field over time. I found the insights of frontline practitioners are super valuable to social care research. We have the advantage of having valuable organisational perspectives, direct service delivery insights, and we can observe the effects of services on our clients over time. With regard to the leaflets and guides from the Living Alone with Dementia project, whilst on secondment, I did a social research course involving a dissertation. I interviewed a worker from Dementia Forward, a voluntary organisation in North Yorkshire, who I'm sure you'll know about from this network. Beforehand, I gave her the Living Alone with Dementia information. She said that reading it had really opened her eyes to looking at the needs of this group in a holistic way. As social workers undertaking community care assessments, we're familiar with the important questions Jenni just described. The questions apply to many of our clients. These needs are reflected in the Community Care Act criteria. I think the challenge for us as social workers is getting through our labyrinth systems in a timely manner when we have high caseloads, and also finding services that are sensitive and accessible to the needs of this group. The materials will be very useful for newly qualified social workers building up their knowledge base, and it will enable them to recognise the specific needs of people living alone with dementia. For my dissertation, I chose to use the themes from the Living Alone dementia research talked about in Jenni's presentation to use as markers to evaluate North Yorkshire Council gateway services for adults. As timescales didn't allow for data gathering from service users, this meant that the lived experience of people living alone with dementia was still central to my research. Since the Care Act in 2014, adult services have been split into short-term preventative services. They aim to prevent and delay people coming into long-term services. And then there are the long-term services for people who have been assessed as meeting Care Act criteria and need services in the longer term. The main front door is usually via customer services. For my research, I evaluated customer services at North Yorkshire Council, which is online and by telephone with no walk-in facilities. Living Well, a preventative service providing a 12-week intervention based on client-identified goals with a focus on developing personal networks. A community social care team where we assess for and provide Care Act support. And also Dementia Forward, who are commissioned by North Yorkshire Council to provide support from dementia advisors, provide groups, activities and daycare. I interviewed a total of 10 practitioners with questions based on the marker, and all the practitioners had received the Living Alone with Dementia information in advance. This is just a kind of summary of my key findings. So in terms of customer services, I found out that people who have dementia, whatever their circumstances, rarely contact customer services themselves. Most commonly it is family members, but otherwise it tends to be health professionals. A proactive approach is needed to bring people living alone with dementia into services, and it was felt that outreach and walk-in customer services, perhaps based in NHS venues, would likely improve access. Dementia-friendly information in any form was lacking across all services. So in terms of a sort of service pathway, to avoid people living alone with dementia falling through the net, once identified, regardless of where they are on their journey, they should be offered a full social care assessment. This would avoid people revolving in and out of preventative services or being passed from one short-term service to another. At the end of a preventative intervention, if the person is agreeable, the case should remain open and a proactive watching brief deployed. A living alone with dementia pathway could be developed. Central will be a history keeper to gather information that could be kept on record and used in the field as a person's dementia journey progressed. This would enable paid carers and staff to have a better understanding of the person, and it could inform best interest decision-making by the council when this is needed. The findings from the community social care teams: people living alone with dementia were rare in terms of caseloads, approximately 1 or 2 cases per year. This was thought to be an underestimate of need, with such people generally coming late into services. People living alone with dementia were nearly always the case that does not close or cannot be passed through the review tray unless the person moved into a care home. Case management involved all manner of tasks, complex and non-complex, with relationship building over the long term being of central importance. It brought about the realisation the extent we rely on families and friends to look after people with dementia. Best interest decisions were likely to be less well informed and more risk averse. There were concerns about the impact and delays caused by people not having a financial representative, how this prevented access to direct payments and other opportunities for more person-centred care. A differentiation was made between people who had lived on their own in the long term and had gone on to develop a dementia illness, as opposed to people with dementia who had been cared for by a living spouse or family member and then found themselves on their own due to a bereavement or their carer having left for some other reason. In broad terms, the first group were seen as being more at risk from social isolation and needing more sort of one-to-one interventions. It was felt the latter were more likely to have some degree of social network, and they would more likely benefit from social and group activities. The findings that were particularly pertinent to people with young onset: practitioners felt that social care support for this group is likely to be less primarily home-based and more activity-based. It was felt assistance was needed to be orientated to time and place, and preparedness to engage in activities and routines was important. A common barrier was transport. It's particularly acute in North Yorkshire, which is the largest and one of the least densely populated counties in England. Another barrier was when a person needed hands-on personal care support. Dementia Forward, who are commissioned to provide activities, groups, day services, are not registered with the Care Quality Commission, so they are unable to help with this. This has created situations where people have had to leave activities they enjoyed because they have developed personal care needs. An example given was of a person with young onset who could walk a number of miles with his outdoor activity group. When he reached the point where he needed more support to use the toilet than just being shown where it was, he couldn't continue with the group. Sometimes social workers commissioned additional support to overcome these barriers. In terms of equipment and assistive technology, people living alone with dementia were less likely to have access to this, and due to a lack of access to informal support with operating it, maintaining it, understanding it, that was also a disadvantage. North Yorkshire Council independence and OT equipment provisions focus almost exclusively on mobility. There's no dementia specialism that focuses on overcoming cognition and memory issues. Basic mobility equipment is free. Equipment for cognition and memory has to be purchased privately. So to conclude, a colleague in Dementia Forward came up with the title for my research, which is Independence or Interdependence ? This reflects my view that preventing people living alone with dementia coming into services at an early point does not support their needs well. Services need to be provided from as early as possible on a walk alongside basis, and it's the onus on the professionals to check in with the clients and not the other way around. So thank you very much for your time. Before ending, I'd like to say a big thank you to all people with dementia who've been able to contribute to research, as obviously it's much the richer and more accurate for it. And I'd also like to say thank you to all my clients with dementia over the years who've taught me so much and helped me develop my own practice wisdom. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Dementia Forward. They supported me every step of the way with the research that I undertook, as did Jenny and the Living Alone with Dementia research team at Sheffield Hallam. So I look forward to answering your questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. That was excellent. The resources that were developed, first of all, putting a spotlight on a sort of hidden individuals, really, and then being able to use those resources, use those guides, and then have the feedback from them is really interesting. And we've packed a lot into this webinar. I think getting the picture from start to finish, from Wayne and Michael right the way through, is brilliant. So thank you so much for that. So look, we've got some time for questions. So I'm going to zap to them. Are the findings of Damien's research available to download and read? If Damien comes off mute and Jenny comes off mute, then we'll... Yeah,
it's not my research.
No, but you involved the people, so it's Jenny's.
Yeah.
The whole team project. So yes, the findings are all on that website, livingalonewithdementia.co.uk. We'll circulate it with the slides later in the week.
Lovely. Yes, lovely. Damien, how were people selected for the research project, and how does one sign up for the research project?
Right, well, at Innovations in Dementia, we host a network of peer groups throughout the UK called the Deep Network. Some of you may well be aware of that. There's about 100 groups of peers meeting independently across the country. We've got a newsletter, we're in touch with the groups, and we just send out taking part opportunities, and we were aware of this. We got quite a good response actually for a number of participants to help sort of be on the inclusionary panel. We had some conversations with them, and we sort of narrowed it down to the 4 who carried on. And then obviously when there were sort of interviews being carried out, we put a call out again for specific people, and we were able to reach a lot more people as well, again through the Deep Network, but also through, I think, Jenny and colleagues at Sheffield Hallam had a sort of that there is a sort of groups of sort of people who want to join research, aren't there? There's an official, and I think in the Dementia UK in the chat, I noticed someone had put a link as well to sort of taking part opportunities if you want to sign up for research.
Yeah, so we recruited, as Damien said, through the Deep Network, but also through Join Dementia Research, which is a website you can sign up for to take part in lots of different types of studies about dementia. And we recruited through local groups as well around the country, you know, going to different memory cafes or Age UK support groups or different things, and just telling people about the research and trying to find people who were in the specific situation. And then we recruited again for that involvement in those stakeholder workshops. So I had a different group of people again, so a different... Oh, somebody's put the Join Dementia Research in the chat. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I was thinking a link to Deep would be good in the chat if it's not in there so far.
We'll do that now.
You manage that, Damien?
I'll manage that.
That'd be excellent, thanks. Thank you very much. Let's move on. George picks up 40% of people with dementia live alone, which I think you and some will have informal support. And I think you said that we didn't know actually the number of people who didn't have informal support, which is something that would be incredibly useful in many respects to know, and to know the individuals as well as the number, of course. Many support systems require a carer to be referred, including for Admiral nurse support. Do we need a specific service for people living with dementia who live alone, presumably without informal, maybe you can address both, without informal support or otherwise? Or can we just add it to existing services? So a specialist service or specific service, or an add-on? Anyone like to take that? Jane. Let's go to Jane first and then to Damien.
Yes, I was going to say, I think one of the findings from my research and evaluation of our services was this thing about the fact that people can come into services at an early point, but then when that's completed, they go away again, and then it's kind of on them to refer themselves if somebody else doesn't. So I think in a way it's about more like having a specific pathway, and that's what kind of one of the findings of my research is this idea that, you know, we need to be proactive to reach out to people, to this group. Then once we've got them, we need to hold on to them and to actually have a specific pathway. But, you know, one of the parts of the research was, if you get it right for this group, you get it right for everybody. And in a way, that kind of pathway would be really good for any vulnerable person living in the community who didn't have immediate support around them. So in my view, it's not necessarily about creating an additional service, but it's about having a really clear pathway, you know, within our services, you know, that meets the need of any vulnerable person. Because I think in essence, it's about what happens when you don't have another on the doorstep, you know, to get you into services or to see that you need help or to help you navigate.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Jane.
And that proactivity, you know, as I say, from the local authority is needed, I think.
Yes. Thank you. Damien, you want to
I was just going to say the same thing, really. I don't think you need specific services, but, you know, the ability to always ask, and certainly since I've been involved in this work, I'm always asking, but what about people living on their own? And it's amazing how challenging a question that is for service providers or people who are looking to develop stuff. So yeah, it's about people really being switched on. And as Jane says, it's the responsibility of sort of people working in the field to make that first approach and seek people out rather than waiting for people to volunteer themselves, because they won't.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to that as well? I mean, one of the issues, I agree that I think it's not necessarily about having a separate service. It's about making sure that the existing work is not unintentionally excluding people. And I think there's such, you know, carers do so very much, and they are so very heavily relied on. And so there's all very often an assumption that there is a carer, or that there will be a carer. And so that assumption can then exclude people who don't have one. So we had one person that we interviewed, for example, had taken a friend with them along to a medical appointment for moral support, and specifically said, this person is not my carer, they're just here to help me remember what was said and whatever. And the professional talked to the other person, and that then made them not go on their own next time. They didn't take anybody for moral support, they went on their own. And I think that was a real shame, and it's come from that kind of assumption there. So
yeah. Thank you. Jane, do you want to add to it, or do you want to pop your hand down? Maybe that's an old hand. Yeah, it's an old hand. I wonder if somebody could just comment on this. Voluntary groups struggle with attendees who come without carers, to do with insurance and to do with being run solely by volunteers. I wonder if there's anyone can comment on that. So it is a barrier, isn't it? That sort of thing.
Is that something you have experience of, Damien, in terms of your groups? That you have groups where people come without carers, don't you?
We do, yeah. And I mean, the example Jane was mentioning about people needing personal care, you know, we've got a sort of various peer groups where people come on their own. We can't provide personal care in those situations. So moments might come where people need that extra support or need someone to come with them. But that sounds like a disability rights access issue to me, you know, and I think that there's strong sort of argument to be had there to put in something parallel for people. Just because, you know, and for people to be prejudiced because they haven't got a care or prejudice. I mean, I think part of the study, there were a couple of people that campaigned to have themselves recognised as carers for themselves. Wasn't that right, Jenny? I think there were a couple of guys.
Okay.
I'm a self-carer, and they could have got access to a couple of groups because of that.
Thank you. Jane, did you want to add?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to say for anybody listening who's in a role professionally or informally supporting people with dementia, at the end of the day, a Care Act criteria is to be able to get involved in leisure activities, you know, and be part of your community, etc. And if transport and personal care is part of that, that shouldn't preclude the person to being able to have those opportunities. And what I found in North Yorkshire, we're a big county and we do things differently in different areas. And in some areas, or the area that I interviewed people, the social workers would, for example, commission a carer to go with the person to a dementia forward activity. So that could be overcome. That happens in that area. In another area, it might be that people wouldn't think to do that. So what I would say is for anyone supporting, it's not really good enough for the local authority to just say, I'm sorry, we haven't got anything, we can't help with that, you know, because actually they can, you know, so it's worth persevering and taking a rights-based approach, because it does happen in some situations.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And like I said, it's not always about personal care. Sometimes, you know, people can attend without personal care and are being unintentionally excluded because of people saying we can't provide personal care and equating that with you, therefore you need to bring a carer, and they're not always the same thing.
Okay, I'm going to move on just because we've got limited time. Would love to hear how people organise themselves in terms of people living alone with a dementia, in terms of using Google Calendar, what technology helps, remembering appointments and such like. And I guess Wayne and Michael would definitely have an answer to this. Any thoughts on this one?
Can I say something? We had a real range of creative ways that people were managing to live on their own. So this group obviously were people who were in a position to be able to consent to take part in research, and they were living at home on their own without being in crisis. So it's a very particular group. But people, yes, we're using, there was lots of use of Alexa, lots of use of kind of online calendars for reminders, a lot of people having set routines in terms of where they put things, keeping things visible in terms of having, you know, calendar on the wall, bus stop reminders here, there and everywhere, that sort of different things. So there was a lot of people making use of technology, but it wasn't always technology. Sometimes it was Post-it notes and those sorts of things. Damien, do you want to say more?
Yeah, I remember meeting a lady recently who was saying, you know, I just keep everything on my calendar on my fridge, and a neighbour came in or a relative came in, thought that shouldn't be there, and they moved it, and I furiously sort of she was absolutely furious. Don't you dare ever touch my calendar again. And, you know, although you'll never be allowed into the house, you know, they still get that interference from other people, which is interesting. And the other thing is, and this is a message, I think, from that list of challenging questions, Jenny, and I think somebody else put in the chat around organising themselves and making appointments. You know, if you're getting a text from the GP saying it costs so much to, you know, so don't you dare miss your, you know, threatening tests, and this is how much it costs, you know, that's absolutely useless to somebody with dementia. And I think the need for, it might not be a specialist service, but to recognise somebody live on their own might mean the doctors might be thinking, well, it might save money if we actually do a home visit for this person, or we go and fetch someone to, you know.
That's it. There was very often no way of flagging when somebody lived on their own. So there was, you know, no way of just doing that with a simple phone call for a reminder.
I'm just going to move on, and I'm going to suggest that Suzanne contacts Jenny direct. If you don't find the development of the resources and website information that's going to be sent out in the follow-up email. If you don't find it there, Suzanne, do contact direct. I'm going to whiz. This is the last question, I think. Is there going to be any research for much younger people with dementia? All research seems to be for people in their 50s and over.
I don't know is the answer to that. Our research didn't have any kind of age category, but the category specific for living on your own and not having any carer did narrow things down considerably for us. But I think that's really important. It's one of those unintentional exclusion things. A lot of the research about dementia does have an age cutoff, and I think just keep asking that question in lots of places, and we will too, and you see that sort of thing happening more.
Okay. I'm going to pose one to you afterward, which is about what the government could do if there was one thing. I'm going to pose that to you afterward in case there's an opportunity to have an answer from you and then include it with the follow-up email. But other than that, I'm so sorry, we're going to miss a few questions, but we need to close now. Thank you so much. That was really very, very useful indeed. Thank you very much indeed. And I'm going to tell you about the next webinar, which is supporting the autonomy of people with young onset dementia. And that's on Wednesday, June the 18th. The link so that you can register for that will be in the follow-up email that you'll get in a couple of days' time, which will be packed full of recording and all the links to the website and the resources and guides and everything. So thank you so much. Thank you very much indeed. End of webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.